me now? Yeah. All right. Welcome to our Ite Missa Est adult faith formation. There's still people kind of sneaking in the door here. We'll give them a second. Oh, I recognize it. Several familiar faces there. So anyway, tonight we are going to talk about health and our spirituality. And I guess in case people don't know us, I'm Marylynn Herchline, and I am one of the members on Ite Missa Est. And I'm a pediatrician, so I work here in the community. And I'll let my husband, Tom, introduce himself.
I'm Tom Herchline. I'm also a physician and an avid runner. And so I guess I will be predictably talking about parts that pertain to running. So, one of the things that we were really hoping for is to have a nice mixture. So we have some scriptures, we have some quotes from saints, popes. We want to give you a little bit of science, a little bit of what we think is good ideas, but at the same time not overwhelming. So hopefully we can do that. And I think what a better way to start off than scripture. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, and that certainly has meaning on many levels. So we'll talk about some of what that might mean. So virtue, so health as a virtue, and being healthy, living a healthy lifestyle as a virtue. A couple of pertinent quotes here with St. Augustine: virtue is a good habit, consonant, so in line with our nature. So it's doing what we should be doing by the way that God designed our bodies. And then a much longer quote from St. Thomas Aquinas, comparing virtues pertaining to how we take care of ourselves in terms of eating and exercise, and comparing those to more traditional spiritual types of virtues, temperance, fortitude. So, with that as just a very brief introduction, what we're going to cover tonight is, what is health? And different people have, it's interesting, different people have different concepts of what it means to be healthy. A biblical perspective, as I said, we have a sprinkling of biblical scriptures throughout the talk. Then Marylynn's going to talk a little bit about the body and about a good diet. And I will jump back in and talk about exercise with just sort of some theory and some practice, and then the health benefits of spirituality. And we'll finish with just some sort of practical, or a little bit more practical plans that maybe you can implement. So one thing that health is not just simply the absence of disease. There are plenty of people that have no recognizable disease that don't live healthy lifestyles that really you would not say that they are healthy. And so there's a couple of sort of concepts I'd like to present in the way I view health. And this is sort of a depiction of one, and that is that health involves the spiritual aspects, your physical aspects, and your mind. And that really, if any one of these areas is suffering, then you're not healthy. Okay? And so we're going to touch on all of these areas. Another way to look at it is that being healthy is about having right relationships. So clearly your relationship with God, your relationship with others, and your relationship with yourself. And Marylynn's going to really address a lot of that last one there, your relationship with yourself. So, promise you a biblical perspective, and we start off with a quote from the first book of the Bible, Genesis. God created mankind in his own image. Okay, so we were created in his image. And that, again, that has meaning on many levels. We don't believe that God has a physical body like we do, although we recognize that Jesus took on our form. And then a quote from Paul in 1 Corinthians: every athlete exercise discipline in every way. And he goes on to say that he does not run aimlessly. There's purpose. He does not fight as if shadowbox. I love that image. Everything is purposeful. And obviously he's comparing the physical training that athletes would do, and the belief is that he was an athlete, but comparing that to spiritual training. There's a couple of quotes here from Pope Pius and Pope John Paul, and these are actually from, I think we've got both of these from the one book. Is it Fit for Eternity? And when we get to the end, we'll kind of, Marylyn's laid out the books that we used in preparing. This one book was very interesting. It really talked a lot about bodybuilding and lifting weights, and had it really broken up and a lot of thoughts, comparisons to the spiritual life, and lots of quotes. So these are a couple that I like from Pope Pius, who he said was the most physically fit, I forget his description, most physically fit Pope, I think was his description, something like that. So that the highest merit is not be attributed to him who has the strongest and most agile muscles, but rather to him who shows the most ready ability to keep them subject to the power of the Spirit. So the idea that it's not just the innate abilities, but what you've done with them. And we certainly believe that in other areas of our lives. But it applies to how you take care of your body. And then from John Paul, there's a need to find time in order to exercise strength, dexterity, endurance, and harmonious movement. And that's necessary for your overall equilibrium. Going back, I think, to that first concept that I showed with the triangle, and not ignoring one aspect of your life. With that, I'll turn over to Marylynn.
Yes, Bob. So I want to spend a little time now talking about our body. And as Tom mentioned, our body, our physical part and our spiritual part, it's very interconnected. So as we were doing this research, we came across several books that were very good. And this one is a book by Kate Wicker. It's called Weightless: Making Peace with Your Body. And in this book, she talks about, she had an eating disorder as a young woman. And she talks about how her faith was able to help her get through the difficulties that she had with her eating problems. And I think it captures for me so much of what we need to do as Christians when we think about our body. We need to start with God. So if you read the quote there, basically she says, reclaiming good health and a positive body image, you have to love yourself. And she claims, and I believe this is true, not only in order for you to love yourself, you have to know God, but even more than that, you have to understand how much God loves you. And when you do that, and you can believe in that, then you are freed of those obsessions, whether it's weight or food or whatever else that holds you back from really appreciating your body and the gift that it is. So, I would like to take a look at our body from two vantages. First of all, from the eyes of faith, and what I would say would be probably a healthier way to view ourselves, and then from the vantage of culture, how our world tells us we should view ourselves, which is probably not quite such a healthy thing. So starting with Scripture, if you read the first one there, St. Paul in the Corinthians tells us, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit? And so to glorify God in your body. So our bodies not only are created by God, made in his image, but we are instilled with his spirit. The second quote from Psalm 139, one of my favorites, talks about, "You formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am wondrously made." How wonderful. So the whole concept that God has given us this wonderful body, and in gratitude, we should be praising and thanking him for this gift that we have. So not only in Scripture, but also the Catechism gives us some evidence the importance of respecting our body. So this quote talks about how our body and soul are one. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to be holy and I'm going to pray, I'm going to take care of my soul, and neglect your body. You have to take care of your body because it's part of who you are as a person. And it says, you may not despise your bodily life, but you're obliged to regard it as good. And remember that this is the body that will be raised up on the last day. So let's talk a little bit about our body. And again, let's talk about it from the vantage of faith. So first of all, as we talked, our body is created by God in his great love for us, created in his image, and created by for his love in his image, and indwelling with his spirit within us. As a physician, I think both of us probably appreciate this. During medical school, you have an opportunity to study the body. So you get to learn about all of the intricacies. So you learn about the muscles and the bones and the nerves and all the different systems. And it is such an amazingly complex, an amazing thing. So, but not only is our body so amazingly complex and beautiful in that way, but look at the diversity. Each person sitting here is different. There never was anyone like you, and never will be anyone like you ever again. So if you take this intricacy and complexity and the diversity and you put the two together, I think that gives great evidence of an amazing, loving, and creative person who we call God. What an amazing thing. So in that respect, how grateful, how awesome is it that we have this gift that he gives to us. So not only do we have this complexity and the diversity, but we have a unity in our body. So as you sit there, your muscles and bones are helping you to sit upright. You have ears that are hearing, a mind that's processing. Your belly's doing what it took care of for dinner. Heart and lungs are working. So much of this is happening even without you thinking about it, but you work together as a whole. So amazing. Again, the unity in our body is such an amazing thing and something to be so grateful and thankful for. You know, we talk about being disciples and thinking and talking and acting like God. You can't do it without your body. God gives us this wonderful gift out of love for us, and we experience the world through our bodies. So again, a wonderful thing that we have. And just as many different people there's that many missions, that many different ways that God calls us to respond to him. So that's our healthy way of looking at a body through the eyes of faith. Let's talk about the way that the world sees bodies. Not quite the same. So in our culture, unfortunately, I think we have a somewhat unhealthy vantage of what is normal. You look at the people walking on the runways, you look at our stars, our movie stars, you look at the athletes. It is all physical. It's all about what it looks like on the outside, not what it looks like on the inside. And yet that's what we are called to believe is the perfect, the desirable. So you put ourselves up against that. Well, obviously, we're never going to measure up. Never going to be good enough. Bottom line is, yeah, we're all a bunch of losers, which is not the case. Because each one of us has a wonderful body that we have been given to take care of. So this slide is actually a little bit comical. I think it gives a little insight. Now this is kind of a generalization, but I think in general, most women look at themselves and find all the flaws. Don't like my hair, my nose, this, that, or that thing. Whereas the guys, they may look in there and say, hey, yeah, I'm pretty good. And both of them probably not a really accurate assessment of their true health. So both maybe with some need to improve. So So as we were doing some research to talk about this, Tom came across this newspaper article where in Israel, they are now going to require that the models weigh a certain amount before they can go on the runway. And not too little, but enough. So there is some push, I guess you would say, in our society to recognize that maybe what we have called to a high ideal is not really accurate and not really healthy. But I don't know how far this trend is going to actually continue. So, you look at our society, and there are a lot of things that influence us. And unfortunately, not all of them have been for the better. And I think if you look at our big issues with obesity concerns in our nation, we can see that we have much room to grow in terms of better health. So, there are probably a lot of reasons why obesity has become a problem in the past probably 20, 30 years. One would be probably the change in our society. We have become much more sedentary. In the olden days, people used to work on farms, they were much more active. Now we pretty much sit behind a desk, and not to bash technology, but you put a TV, a computer, and a video game in every house, and pretty much most of the time people are behind a screen, not moving. So that's one issue I think that's a problem. The other issue I think that's a problem is the food that we eat. In the days past, you would grow your food and you'd bring it in and you'd have pretty much the food that came from the farm. With all of the processing that has gone on through the course of the past several decades, we now have a great way of making lots of food, but unfortunately the food is very processed, so they've taken out a lot of the nutrients, and they've added a lot of things to increase its fat and or its sugar, which doesn't necessarily make it healthier. And it's not just the kinds of food, but it's the variety of food. I always just stand in awe when I go to the cereal aisle at Kroger or Meijer, and you look down, and on either side, there's probably 200 different kinds of cereal. I mean, so many things to choose from, it's almost overwhelming. And I think those choices make it difficult for us. So we're like, well, I'll take one of those, one of those, and one of those. So not necessarily helpful to us. So as physicians, we don't just give it a name, but we use a calculation to help us to understand better what is healthy or what's not as healthy. And we use the term body mass index. Some people would hear it called BMI. And the way this is calculated, you take the weight and you divide it by the height squared. If you're doing it in pounds and inches, you would use a conversion of 703. So I put up there the what a normal is 18 to 25. This is for an adult. Obese would be over 30. For children, it's a little bit different. We calculate it the same way, but we actually put it on a graph. So every time a child comes in for a checkup to my office, we'll do their height and weight, put that on a graph, but then we'll also calculate the BMI, and we follow that as part of their healthy checkup because we feel that's an important part of telling us about the health of that particular child. So if you look at what is kind of a calculated BMI, for somebody who's 5'8" and 150 pounds, it's 22, that's a BMI. You think, wow, that's not that small. 150 is not that, you know. For 5'8" and 200 pounds, the BMI is 30, so that would be considered obese. So let me just give you a quick little glance of what has happened to our nation over the past 25 years or so. So in 1990, if you look down here, whoops, let me see down here. So you can look down here and see these are kind of the percentages. So let's kind of keep an eye on Ohio here. So right now, in 1995, we have 15 to 19% of our state population are considered obese. You go to 2000, we're up to greater than 20. You go to 2005, we are 20 to 24. And now in 2010, 25 to 29% of the adults in our state are considered obese. So, what does that mean? And the whole reason why it's a concern is there are a lot of things that are associated with obesity. Things that include diabetes, heart disease, hypertension. For those people who have a BMI of greater than 35, they have a 29% higher risk of mortality because of that weight. So obviously it has a long-term negative effect on being overweight. So what can we do? How can we change the course? Or as the one book says, how can we tend the temple a little better to help with our weight issues? And I think the two things that we're going to talk about tonight hopefully give you some help in that regard. First of all would be healthy eating, and second of all, exercise. So even long ago, St. John Vianney had a notion that, yes, eating appropriately is good not just for the body and the soul. He says, do not let us be led by our appetite. We shall ruin our health, we shall lose our soul. So let's talk about what it means to eat healthy. And so what I'd like to start off with is beginning to say that food in and of itself is not good or bad. You don't have a good apple and a bad brownie. They're both food. One is a little healthier for you than the other, so therefore should be chosen more regularly than the other. So, but they're good. They're both good. And again, reflecting on this from the eyes of faith, food is a gift from God. Just think about the Old Testament. You know, the Father giving the manna to the Israelites in the desert. In the New Testament, Jesus blessing the loaves and fishes and distributing it to the people. The Last Supper, bread and wine that Jesus uses as his Eucharistic feast. So food is a great thing, and again, a gift when it's used appropriately. So part of what we need to do with healthy eating is eating the kinds of food that really help to nourish our body and to fuel us appropriately. Now, here's one thing, and of course, God gives us healthy desires to eat, which we have to eat in order to survive. So it's a good thing that we want to eat because we need to in order to be who we are. I think one of the things that, particularly the one book talked about, so Kate Wicker, in her book Weightless, talks about the importance of eating out of hunger, not out of emotion. And I know, I'll be first to admit, there are times that I'm sure I eat not because I'm hungry, but because I'm tired, or anxious, or sad, or mad, or I'm bored. And I just go to the refrigerator and say, oh, So what several of the authors talk about, and I think this is really important, is when you go to get a snack, for example, stop and think, am I really hungry? Or is there something else that's causing me to think that I'm hungry? Kind of check out what you're longing, what that emptiness, whatever that feeling is inside. And actually, Kate, she would say, turn to Christ instead of the refrigerator. And she even comments, she said, say a prayer. Say, you know what, I'm really anxious about this. Maybe that's why I'm thinking I need something to eat. And a couple of others will say, go get a glass of water. Take a walk, say a prayer. 10, 15 minutes later, if you still are really hungry and you think, yeah, I think I really do need a snack, all right, go and eat something, but in a small amount. Don't pig out on 6 cookies or whatever. Just take one small thing and then move on. So that whole notion of emotional eating, I think, is something that, again, is probably very evident, but unless you think about it, it may not be something you recognize. So what I would like to do is spend some time in the specifics of talking about healthy eating, and I want to use it particularly in the standpoint of a heart-healthy diet. And the reason why I'm choosing that is because heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. And so part of what I'm going to talk about in the talk about our diet is how you can reduce your cholesterol, because cholesterol is one of the things that is very involved in causing atherosclerotic heart disease and therefore the problems that we're trying to avoid, mortality, etc. So there are a couple different kinds of cholesterol. You probably have heard them before. There's the LDL, that's the low density lipoprotein, and the HDL, the high density lipoprotein. So the LDL is what we call kind of the bad cholesterol. We want that to be lower because the higher it is, the more risk that you have. And then you can see here, for different people, the goal is going to be different because if you already have heart disease, you have to have an even less LDL than somebody who does not have any health risk. Our HDL actually is our good cholesterol. That's something you want to try to raise up. There's some genetic basis for your HDL. Women typically have higher HDLs than men. Unfortunately, when you go through menopause, then you have that less of an issue or less of an advantage. However, exercise is something that will help increase your HDL, so it's certainly something that you would like to try to do. So, let's talk about a heart-healthy diet. So first of all, let's talk about portion control. And I think this is another thing that our society does a really big disservice to us. I think you go to Cheesecake Factory and you look at the size of the plates that they bring out, and there's enough food for 2 or 3 people on one platter. And we now have this concept, well, that's how much food I need to eat in this meal. So we have become completely out of line what appropriate portion control is. So that's the first thing, becoming more aware of what's an appropriate portion size. A couple other healthy and helpful things to do in terms of making sure you eat the right amounts. Sit at the table when you eat. Don't sit in front of the TV. Because inevitably, you sit in front of the TV and you just sit there and you pop that food in your mouth, and before you know, you've eaten the whole bag of whatever it was. The other thing is, if you're at the table, put the small serving or the reasonable serving on your plate. Get rid of that bowl, take it away from the table, because otherwise you're going to keep taking seconds and thirds. Not necessarily you're still hungry, it's just there and I don't want to waste it. So really working on the importance of portion control. And again, it takes a little thought in that regard. So what kind of foods? Healthy fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and I'm going to go through specifics of those in just a second. Reducing your sodium is certainly an important part of a heart-healthy diet. And it's different amount for different people. For a otherwise healthy adult, 2,500 milligrams a day is what's required. Those people who have hypertension, diabetes, kidney disease, people over 50, and those African American people, they would only have a level of 1,500 milligrams per day in terms of the amount that they should get. So several ways that you can kind of reduce the sodium in your diet. Take the salt shaker off of the table. If it's sitting there right in front of you, you're probably going to use it. Don't put it close by. And avoid foods that have typically high sodium contents. Those would be soups, typically can be very high. So look for the low sodium soups. And processed or frozen foods oftentimes are also high in sodium. So just be aware of that when you choose different processed things. Plan your meals ahead of time. Here's one of those things that a lot of people, I guess, don't realize. To be healthy, it takes a little bit of effort, both in terms of setting aside the time to exercise, but even in terms of setting aside the time and effort to plan your meals. So when you go to the grocery, go there with your list of what you want for the meals that you're going to make during the course of a week. So when you come back, you have all of those things ready to go. You know, you can even make them ahead of time and freeze them if you want to be really organized. I don't think I could ever get that, but some people could. So planning ahead. The more you eat out, the more fat and the more sodium that you're going to be taking in your diet, and therefore the more long-term not good health you're going to probably be choosing to have. And then finally, yes, allow an occasional treat. You know, I think I've seen this even with kids. Some parents with good intention say, no, you can never have this, you can never have this, you can never have this. And then they go over it like to a friend's house and they get exposed to some like special treat and they go hog wild because they've never been taught a healthy respect for those little treats. So you say, okay, you know, you can have a cookie, but you can have one cookie. It's not a bad food, it's just something we don't have a lot. So you teach them, again, that food is good, but it's used in a certain way to create good health long term. So I want to spend a little time just in the particulars about what kind of food would be healthy foods. So fruits and vegetables, that kind of is a no-brainer. 5 servings of fruits or vegetables a day is what's required, or what is recommended. You want frozen or fresh particularly would be best. You want to stay away from cans, but if you cannot stay away because just expense-wise, do low-sodium canned vegetables and the fruits that are not packed in heavy syrup, like the juice, ones packed in juice. When you start putting butter and cream sauce and frying your vegetables, you kind of lose some of the advantage of the health benefits. So again, limit it or avoid those kind of things. Your grains. Now, I'll be first to admit, I grew up on white bread. I think probably most of us grew up on white bread. And it has become fairly obvious to me, and so I've made some significant change in my diet and our diet at home, that whole grains are really good for you. And particularly because they add a lot of fiber, and adding that fiber definitely increases your ability to lower your cholesterol. So whole grain flours, whole grain bread, brown rice, whole grain pastas, ground flaxseed, those would all be the things that you should actively pursue. And I think Tom was taking an insurance quiz thing to see in terms of what a healthy, I think was something about, the healthy choices. And I think 3 to 4 whole grain foods a day is what they would require. Now you kind of see on the other side, oh, those are all those really good things that we like a lot. The donuts and the muffins and the cakes and the pies and the cookies. And again, it doesn't mean you can never have those things, but again, in moderation, in small amount, and used judiciously, so you don't, you have mostly healthy and a little bit of the other. So fats and cholesterol, actually, you kind of think, well, fats are important. Yes, they are important. We do need some fats in our body for normal function. There are certain kinds of fats that are better for us than others. We want to avoid the trans fat and the saturated fats because those have greater issues in terms of raising our cholesterol. However, the monounsaturated fats that you would find in the olive oil and the canola oil, and the polyunsaturated fats that you see in the nuts and the seeds, they actually, if used in moderation, can lower your cholesterol a little bit. So again, kind of making those healthy choices. Now, again, looking on the other side, butter, bacon fat, gravy, non-dairy creamers. Not to say you can never eat them, but again, eating those in moderation and choosing wisely in regards to that. Protein sources. Again, we're looking for those non-processed things. So low-fat dairy. So I would recommend skim milk, yogurts, cottage cheeses, things like that. And it's really important. I think even adults forget you still have bones. We do have bones. And particularly as women, as we get older, we need calcium for our bones to prevent breakage. So you need to make sure you get calcium in your diet, and the low-fat dairy products is a great way to do it. And it also has good protein as well. So egg whites, fish, particularly salmon, is a good option in terms of protein. Legumes, so peas, beans, lentils, soy, and tofu. So those are all the healthier options in terms of the low protein. And these are the things, again, you want to use minimally. So the cold cuts, the processed things, hot dogs, sausages, bacon. Again, those things that we tend to like, but we need to choose and use in lesser amounts. So coming full circle, we talked about eating, and we talked about how do we make healthy choices. And I think we go back to our faith, and there actually is a Christian virtue called temperance, which kind of is indicating in terms of moderation or balance. So if you look at the catechism, temperance is a moral virtue that moderates the attraction of pleasure and provides balance in the use of created goods. So it gives us that ability to say, okay, I see the apple and I see the chocolate cake, and I know the apple's the better thing, and I'm going to choose that. Some other time I might choose a chocolate, but today I'm going to choose the apple because it's the better thing. And I think that C.S. Lewis gives us a very good quote when he says, temperance is not abstaining, but is going the right length and no further. So now that I've given you a kind of an overview of healthy eating, Tom is going to come up and talk a little bit about the importance of exercise and finding that healthy balance in terms of creating good health.
All right, so again, another quote. Let us love God with the strength of our arms and sweat of our brow. And exercise doesn't have to involve a lot of sweat, but most good exercise does involve a little sweat. So, why exercise? Why not just concentrate on eating a really great diet? I mean, I'm going to go through some of the benefits in more detail, but just kind of, a larger list to at least mention. Being physically active helps keep the function of your body in good shape. If it's there's the old adage, use it or lose it. When you stop doing things, at some point you lose the ability to do them. As Marylynn had mentioned, the body is a gift from God, and one way we show our gratitude is by taking care of it. We're called to love God with prayers, but also with the way that we exert our bodies. Exercise is a way of giving glory to God. And one thing that many people do, and we'll mention a little bit further on here, is using exercise time as a prayerful or praise time, and combining the two. So we know that Jesus walked a lot in his ministry, and when we were over in Israel, one of our things that we really enjoyed was going up the mountain, and we walked up, and it was a good hike, and I'm sure that the distances they covered, that they were in very good shape. We know that Jesus worked as a carpenter, so he probably had a lot of strength in his arms. And so we should follow that as the model for our lives. So those are sort of the spiritual, if you will, aspect of looking at the benefits of exercise. In terms of the health benefits of exercise, there are a number of studies, and I'm going to go through a couple, that show that you will live longer with exercise. And not just live longer, but you will have reduced chronic diseases. So, Marylynn talked about heart disease and a related disease of stroke. And when you suffer from those, you don't necessarily die. You may survive with the disease, but have great disability as a result of the disease. Exercise puts most people I know into a very good mood. And a lot of people use exercise as sort of a stress relief. Marylynn talked about, eating when you're anxious. Exercising when you're anxious is very stress relieving for most people. Increased energy. That actually can be two-sided. I have listed as the next one here, better sleep. Some people can exercise and then just, go straight to sleep, and some people are kind of the opposite because they're like exercise and they're all wound up. So I'm thinking in general terms that, a lot of people exercise in the morning or kind of in the middle of the day, and that kind of gives them energy throughout the rest of the day, and they sleep well at night after having exercised during that day. Personally, I find that if I exercise late at night, I'm going to be awake for a little while. So I guess if I need to stay up, that's a good plan. So this is one of the studies that I was alluding to, and they looked at over 400,000 individuals in this study that were followed for over 8 years. And they divided individuals into different groups. And one of the groups was inactive, so they're basically not doing anything. I think the current term is couch potato. And they compared to that group individuals that averaged 15 minutes a day of low volume activity. So what is low volume activity? Almost anything where you're not sitting on the couch. In a little bit, I'll be talking more about moderate, intermediate, or moderate levels of exercise. And those are simple things like brisk walking. So low exercise group had 14% reduction in mortality. Now we're talking 15 minutes a day, okay? And I think one unfortunate myth that people have believed is that to get any extra benefits, you need to exercise an hour a day or more, and you have to exercise every day. And that's really the studies that have been done, and there's a lot of recent studies on this topic. I think it's very exciting because it's really very reasonable amounts. 15 minutes a day led to not just a reduction in mortality leading to longer lives, but 10% reduction in death from cancer. I think that's one of the surprising things that has come out from some of these recent studies is other easily documented benefits besides just living longer. And reduced deaths from cancer has been shown in a number of studies now. So in another group here, the previous one was just they just did surveys of people. This is one where they actually took sedentary adults, average age of 70. Okay, again, another myth is that exercise is for young people, and they divided them into two groups. One group, they had them do moderate exercise, and again, I think I've got a list coming up of in a few slides here, a little bit more about moderate exercise. Maybe not looking, yeah, it's coming up in several slides here. But so one group, they had them do moderate exercise, and one group, they had them do flexibility training, so basically stretching. And they noticed a number of things, of benefits in the group that had moderate exercise. One was that they had an improved response to the influenza vaccine. So they measured the antibody levels. And another was reduced illness severity. So the people who got sick didn't get as sick. And it was primarily a study looking at influenza. But one of the other things that they commented on was that they had improved sleep in the moderate exercise group. So again, this was fairly small amounts in terms of time, and this was a group that was sedentary at age 70. All right, now I'm going to get into some even more complicated slides here. And actually, I think this is the same study, just broken down. No, this is a different study, but it's very similar. So they looked at aerobic training was this group here. Resistance training, so this was not just stretching. Yes?
Could you define resistance training?
Right, so resistance training included things like lifting weights, okay, using the bands for the stretch bands. So things that would improve strength, okay, that would not necessarily be aerobic training, so not necessarily associated with increasing your heart rate. And so they had a group that did just the resistance training, just the aerobic training, or that did both. And they measured lots of different things here. So in this one here, they looked at waist circumference. So not surprisingly, if you did both, your waist got smaller than if you did either alone. They looked at, in this one here, they looked at blood pressure. Again, if you did both, you had more reduction in your blood pressure than either one alone. the HDL, so Marylynn talked about good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, with HDL being the good cholesterol. You want to do things that increase them, and of things that you control, assuming you can't control who your parents are, the exercise is the main one. So when you do both of them, you get the most benefit in terms of improving your HDL. And you can see that for most of these, if you could only do one or the other between aerobic training and resistance training, that there was more benefit to the aerobic training. But pretty consistently, there was even more improvement if you did both. So I think this is really one of the thoughts that has framed the national effort to promote exercise and to get people more active. And I'll come back to some more specific numbers in terms of what the guidelines are now. This was a study just looking at diabetes, and this was vigorous exercise. So vigorous exercise would be like swimming hard, running, cycling hard, things that make you short of breath. And the more times per week you did this, so this is less than once a week, once, 2 to 4 times per week, and then 5 or more times per week, the better, the lower the incidence of diabetes. And it was what we call a dose response. So you can see that as this increased, this progressively decreased. And that's considered stronger evidence that there is a true association there as opposed to just something that's randomly happening. I mentioned about disability, and so in a very long study, 21 years of follow-up, I was very impressed by the diligence of not just the authors of this study, but the people who participated in this study. They selected, in this study, runners and then non-runners. And they looked at the chances of dying from a heart attack or stroke, and the runners were much less likely to die from a heart attack or stroke. And again, that was not surprising. I mean, I think it was reaffirming that there is benefit to the exercise. But they also found that runners were less likely to die from cancer, less likely to die from infection, and less likely to become disabled. And they had a very complicated measure for disability, but it's basically, how well can you take care of yourself? How well can you get around? Just, things that really make a big difference, especially later in life when those kinds of problems become more prevalent. And then this was some information from the Mayo Clinic that looked at effects of exercise on depression. They concluded that we know that exercise causes you to release endorphins. Endorphins are a natural hormone that's associated with pleasure, with just feeling good. And it's felt that is one of the main reasons why people do report feeling good with exercise. Another thing that happens with regular exercise is improved confidence. People just feel better about themselves, more self-confidence. And many people, and it's certainly true for myself and for Marylynn, there are a lot of social interactions involved with our exercise. I run with the group. She goes to the rec center and does the kind of group workouts and sees a lot of the same people when they visit, and they all, know each other. And it's very motivating to exercise with other people. And it's also a very good way to meet people and to have more social interactions, which we know is a good thing from a mental health perspective. Having said that, there's not anything wrong with exercising by yourself. Some people, really look forward to that time when they can kind of get away. They got a stressful job and just have no interactions with anyone, just being alone with their thoughts. All right, back to some more complicated graphs here. This was a fairly recent study that has been talked about a fair amount, and they looked at the amount of exercise per day and the amount of benefit in terms of living longer. And you can see the blue line here is vigorous exercise, and the conclusion was that when you get up close to an hour a day, you've pretty much gotten all of the benefits you're going to get out of vigorous exercise. Again, vigorous exercise you can think of as things that really make you short of breath. Being on one of the stair climber machines, riding a bike hard, running, again, swimming at a brisk pace. And so those of us that have questionable judgment that go beyond 60 minutes a day probably aren't doing it at least to live longer. On the other hand, when you look at people who have what I'll go through as fitting into the category of moderate exercise, there seems to not even be, getting out to 2 hours here, haven't reached the limits of the benefit yet. So, again, moderate exercise would be just walking, biking at a comfortable pace where you can talk, carry on a conversation easily without being short of breath. Again, swimming slowly, ballroom dancing would be a moderate exercise activity. So this is, again, not just living longer, but having a better quality to your life and preventing other diseases. So they, in the same study, they broke it down into no exercise or inactive group, low, based on sort of minutes per day of exercising, moderate, high, or very high. So you can see that death from all causes, again, just keeps dropping even into the highest group. And this has been, again, shown in many studies, and is primarily due to benefits in cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, but also lower incidence of diabetes and fewer deaths from cancer. So this is another big study showing fewer deaths from cancer related to exercise. So we know diet's important, but there's additional benefit to be had in these other areas from a reasonable exercise program. I loved this slide. This is again from the same study, and they had so many people enrolled that they were able to break it down by all of these different categories. So anything that would have fallen over here was people that suffered, if you will, from exercise, and everybody on this side are people that benefited from exercise. So men benefited, women benefited. If you were 20 to 59, you benefited. If you were over 60, you benefited. So you can kind of go through here. If you smoked, you benefited. If you were obese, you benefited. And so really, you pick the subgroup, they benefit from exercise. All right, so the current guidelines from from the CDC on what constitutes reasonable goals that everyone should try to do. First off, there's aerobic exercise, and as I showed you from that one study, there's benefits from doing both aerobic exercise and muscle strengthening, or in that study they called it resistance training. And the recommendation is to get moderate exercise for 30 minutes a day, at least 5 days of the week, or vigorous aerobic exercise for 25 minutes a day, at least 3 days a week. So, and I've mentioned this a couple of times. So moderate exercise, like a brisk walk, cutting the grass, water aerobics, and then vigorous would be running. Again, swimming is swimming at a brisk pace, and cycling or spinning. The spinning classes have become very popular at the fitness centers. So that's good, but you should add to that some types of muscle strengthening exercise 2 days a week, and you should work out all of your major muscle groups. So not any actual time limit on that recommendation, but you can do things in the gym with free weights. They have all these machines. You can do things at home. You can do push-ups, sit-ups. There are lots of simple exercises where when you combine a handful of these exercises, you'll work out all of the major muscle groups in your body. All right, so I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about how being faith-filled, how practicing your faith is actually good for your physical health. And there's some surprising studies out there. So we know that we believe that living our faith is healthy. We certainly rely on prayer in terms of disease. We look at, again, relationships, having a support group, being part of a community, and we know that that is a healthy thing for mental health. Having rituals, having regimen in your life, structure to your life, is a good thing. It being connected to something that has meaning beyond just your own purpose and existence is something that contributes to your own sense of meaning. And we believe that works of charity have a positive effect on how you perceive yourself and how you feel about yourself. And these are all part of being part of a faith formation. So, more specifically, health benefits of spirituality, feeling content with where you are in your life. There's one change after another that you encounter in life. You have kids, your kids grow up and move away. You have a spouse, you lose a spouse. These are all part of life, and just like we need to understand that our body is wonderful and to love our bodies because they're a gift. The situation that you are in your life is where God has put you, and it's there for a reason. And so having a recognition of, that God is in charge, that helps you to feel content with where you are in your life and leads to inner peace. Doing the things that you believe that God is leading you to gives you a deep sense of satisfaction, and those are very important. That's a very important part of being healthy. Again, coming back to these right relationships, relationships with others, relationship with God. Maintaining balance, which Marylynn certainly talked a lot about with healthy eating, building relationships, having a sense of purpose, having a sense of accomplishment from facing challenges, overcoming challenges. So I mentioned that there are some surprising studies out there, and there was two in particular I'm going to discuss here. The first one looked at sort of more external or obvious, what would be typically labeled as religious activities, especially going to church was their main measure here. And they kind of group people by how much they went to church. So those that went to church regularly were more likely to stop smoking. Some of these are not so surprising. Stop smoking, staying married, increasing social contacts. But they were also more likely to increase the amount that they were exercising, and more likely to live longer. And that was after looking at, adjusting for smoking and obesity and diabetes and other things. People lived longer that went to church regularly. On the flip side, this study looked at sort of private religious activities, prayer time, reading the Bible, and this was a large study of individuals who were over 65. Of the group that rarely or never spent time in private religious activities, they had higher rates of smoking and alcohol intake. Again, probably not too surprising, but they had shorter survival, even after you control for these other factors. So there is clearly things, and it's hard to go beyond what the studies say, but we believe that it is, as I started with, a part of being healthy and having right relationships. And it starts with having a right relationship with God if you want to be healthy. And with that, turn it back over to my wife.
All right, so I'm going to pull it all together. So setting a plan of action. So, and I think it goes all the way back to the beginning again. So where do we need to start? We need to start with God. Because we need to see ourselves. Are you going to stop now and take a break because we have a few more things to talk about?
I think what we suggest is take a break.
Okay.
Do this.
Okay.
And then come back to questions. Allow when we end this. Because people have sat for about an hour.
Okay. So you're on bated breath. Go get something to eat. Healthy choices, I will tell you, they are healthy. And then we'll come back and finish off. So now that we had a healthy snack, and I'll tell you some secrets about the snacks later. They really were healthy, and they have some kind of unusual ingredients, but they're still delicious. So, setting a healthy plan. And I think, as we talked before, it still needs to start with God for us to really have a healthy approach to things. So we need to remember that we are created by God in His great love for us. And then in response, we need to discern how do we become the healthiest we can, both physically and spiritually. So I think it starts with a plan. And I think it's probably best to come up with 3 maybe things that you're going to decide to do. You don't want to go hog wild. If you go too crazy and too many things, you'll lose sight of maybe a goal because you become overwhelmed with too many things. So setting 3 simple goals. So for example, maybe you might say, all right, I'm going to exercise 15 minutes a day, 3 times a week. Start small. Maybe you're going to say, I'm going to move the salt shaker off my table and I'm not going to salt food anymore. And maybe you might say, I am going to eat my 5 servings of fruits or vegetables every day. So something simple like that. Keep a journal. It really makes you very accountable when you write it down. And keep track of your progress because, you don't know how you're doing. Did I exercise? I can't remember. What did I? So if you write it down and then you can actually look back and say, wow, I did really well this week, or I didn't do as well. What was the thing that caused me from not being successful in my planning? And so then go back and think, this is something I can do to make it more successful in terms of my plan. And then assess your progress so you can kind of see, are you becoming a healthier person because of what you're doing? So some hints for success. One of the things that I talk about at the office all the time, I have a healthy habits recommendations that I give the kids every day. And I tell them, I recommend this for you, but I try to live this myself because I think I'm a hypocrite if I tell you to do something and I don't believe that I should do it myself. So 5, 2, 1, almost none is what our motto is at the office. So it's 5 servings of fruits or vegetables every day, no more than 2 hours of screen time. Try that one. An hour of exercise, which I know may not be reasonable for all of us, but again, making that at least an effort to put exercise into your daily life. And then the almost none are calories that we get from liquids. What I mean by that would be juice and soda for the kids and alcohol. Remember that beer and wine? It adds up. So you need to really be careful in terms of adding extra calories that are, and that doesn't mean you can never have your glass of wine, but if you're having 3 or 4 glasses of wine, actually there was an article in the newspaper about how much alcohol adds calories to your diet. So just at least become aware of that in terms of healthy things. So find people to join your effort. Like Tom was saying, he's got a great group of running friends he loves to. They go all over the country running marathons. They have a great time. I have my Zumba buddy out there in the audience. Hi, Kathy. I have my hiking buddy, Laura and Tom. So we love to go together. And it just makes it so much fun when you have somebody to do it with, and it makes you accountable. So somebody goes, are you going to Zumba? Are you going to TRX? Are you, so it makes you decide that you're going to exercise. So having somebody do it, and it just makes it so much more fun. Choose something you like to do. If you don't like running, that would be me. I'm not a runner. My husband, he can run all he wants. I love the runner. I don't love running. I love to dance. So Zumba, I love Zumba. I could Zumba all of the time if given an opportunity. So find something you like to do, because if you don't like to do it, guess what? You're not going to do it. So that would be really something important to do. Take God along with you when you exercise. So like Tom was saying, I know sometimes when I hike, my hiking buddies aren't able to join me, I'll bring my praise and worship music on, and I'll use that as part of my prayer and reflection. Sometimes I won't even bring that. I'll just pray when I'm walking in the Narrows. I feel like I'm so close to God when I am out there hiking. It's a great experience. You could even download some podcasts and have Father Satish along on your walk or hike if you like to make it really exciting. So there's so many ways. One of the books actually that we have up here is called The Rosary Workout. And what it talks about is using interval training while you're meditating on the rosary. So kind of an interesting thing. Interval training is when you go faster and slower. And it has from beginning walkers up to serious runners that you could use. So we'll talk a little bit about our reading material up here when we get to the end. So bringing God along certainly is something that I think can be very helpful. You can get healthy both spiritually and physically. Now here's one of those things I think people don't want to admit, but you have to say it. When you are making an effort to be healthy, you're going to have to involve some time management, and it's going to take some discipline. And it's going to mean you probably are going to have to give something up that you like. You may not be able to sit in front of the TV for 2 or 3 hours, or the computer for how many hours, because you only have so many hours in the day. But I think that you will find, and I believe this is true, and I think Tom would say for himself, once you start doing it regularly, once you do it over and over, it becomes a habit. We talked about that virtue habit is a virtue. It becomes so much a routine part of your day that when you don't do it, you miss it. And I think people look at me like, how could you miss it? You miss exercising? I become almost irritable when I don't exercise, and I find such joy in it. And if you get to that point, you will get to that point if you do it regularly. So it's something to work towards. And maybe it's the endorphins that are part of it as well. But I think it can be a great joy if you find something you like to do as well. And finally, again, reward yourself. When you've done a really good job and you've been exercising and you've done well with your diet, choose a healthy reward. I mean, don't go out and pig out or whatever. But some people said, maybe get a manicure or pedicure. That would not be my style, but something that you would say, good job done, and then kind of give you that incentive to keep going forward in terms of your plan. All right, we as parents, we teach by example, right? So if we want to help our children live healthy lifestyles, we have to start it here. So we need to exercise and we need to eat to show them how that we do that. We need to have a healthy image of our own body in order to give this healthy image to our children. So those who are the grocery shoppers, you are the gatekeeper. If you don't want chips in the house, don't buy them. Don't bring them in the house. I don't buy chips. I love chips. And he has a lot more staying power than I do. And if I bring chips in the house, I'll eat them. He won't touch them. So I just don't bring them in. So, and the exercise, make it a part of your regular activities. So instead of saying, well, let's go rent a movie, let's say, let's go walk the dog. Let's go hiking in the Narrows. Let's go bowling. And it doesn't cost a lot. I think people have this notion you have to pay a lot of money to exercise. You need a pair of shoes and go outside. And I don't believe in the motto, oh, it's too cold outside, I can't go. I tell kids, put your coat on. Yesterday I went out walk running last night when it was 30 or whatever. You dress appropriately, but go outside. Good fresh air, it's good for you. So we really need to, as parents, live what we want to preach and teach and live by example. So finally, we've kind of come full circle. And we, as Tom talked about at the beginning, we need to be whole, body, mind, and soul. And where do we find that wholeness? We find it when we start with God. And being healthy, I think, is a way that we can give glory to God because we recognize this wonderful gift that he's given to us and we care for it because we realize that this is a gift. And when you receive something that's from someone, you take good care of it because that gives respect to the person who gave you that gift. So, and it gives him gratitude for that. We talk a lot at the parish about discipleship. We talk about what it means to be a disciple. You think like Jesus, you talk like Jesus, you act like Jesus. This is all done with our body. So we experience the love of God through our body, through creation, and then we return our love to him through our bodies and how we work and how we serve. And when we take care of our bodies, I think we allow ourselves to become what I call healthfully holy. And the purpose, I think, of this is that we, because his spirit is inside of us, we become Christ, and then we take Christ into the world. So we become his presence to the world. So a great reason to have this healthy body to go out with. So I'd like to close with one of my favorite prayers by St. Teresa of Avila that I think kind of brings it all together in terms of what does this mean. So Christ has no body now but yours. No hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes through which he looks compassion on this world. Christ has no body now on earth but yours. So hopefully that gave you kind of a synopsis of what good health might look like, both from the diet and exercise. I just want to go over a little bit of these books. Let me bring them up here. And actually, I'm going to put these up in the lending library after this weekend, so they will be available for people to read. The first one is called Fit for Eternal Life. This was the book that Tom was talking about that actually, he was a bodybuilder, so he used weightlifting and incorporated spirituality with it. A really interesting kind of read. This one I would recommend highly. The Weightless, Making Peace with Your Body. She has such insight on the human body, understanding the human body from a spiritual part of things. This is the one who had the eating disorder. I think anyone who has a young daughter, this would be a great book to read for themselves, and potentially if your daughter's a little older, even to share with your daughter. This is a fun book. This is called Tending the Temple. And this is 365-day devotional. So each day it goes and it talks about the saint of the day, tells a little bit about the history of the saint, and then talks about either a spiritual or a physical kind of devotion. So talks, let's see, for example, like St. Monica on May the 4th. And then it talks about St. Monica and then tells you maybe you go out and take a walk or do one of the corporal works of mercy. So a great, fun, different kind of devotion, what actually involves both physical as well as spiritual things. And then finally, the rosary workout that I talked about, including interval training with meditations on the rosary. So they all have a Catholic perspective, not just a Christian perspective, which is kind of fun. So exercise and good health with a Catholic vantage. So that's our, and so we'll open up, one other caveat. Anyone who's over 40, who decides they would like to start some kind of health fitness plan, please contact their doctor and speak to them before they do anything. This is information that we give as helpful information, but each person's health needs to be individually monitored by their physician, so we don't want to take any responsibility for having people get injured because of what we said. All right, there you go. So questions? So now you know what all those questions, there's no questions, right? Yeah.
If you've already been diagnosed with high cholesterol or diabetes or something, by starting to eat right and exercising, can you reverse those things?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. The exercise certainly, as Tom was talking, you can actually increase your HDL and lower your LDL, and there's certainly, we talked about the different foods where you can lower the LDL. It's never too late, I guess I would say, yeah.
Unfortunately, some people inherited really bad cholesterol from their parents, so the diet and exercise alone is not going to be enough for some people, but there are many people that medicines alone isn't enough. They really need, to follow a diet closely.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Foods to stay away from: coconut.
Yes.
All kinds of coconut, fresh coconut juice.
Well, I don't know, because actually I was going to say one of the things that I made that was in the healthier kind of things had coconut oil in. I think the moral of the story with it is the whole temperance and moderation, everything in moderation. A lot of the coconut is sweetened coconut when you bake with it, so I think you need to be careful if it's not sweetened, it's probably better for you. In regards to the healthy snacks, even the cookies, I like to bake, as probably many of you know. The chocolate cookies, anybody take a guess at what was in those chocolate cookies?
Black beans.
Well, somebody knows the answer.
Black beans?
Black beans, yes, very much so. So there are a lot of ways that you can add fiber and protein to even healthy things. And again, that doesn't mean you sit down and eat the entire batch of them. Probably would not be good for you in many ways, but you can add some health to even your sweets to make them. And the other ones, I'm using dark chocolate, sometimes adds a little better health to it. And those both had lots of oats, the caramel apple cookie and the chocolate cherry one. The oats, again, increasing the fiber, which increases or lowers your cholesterol. So there's ways to eat healthy and still taste good. So you don't have to suffer terribly. And yeah, there's good food out there, even otherwise. Yeah.
Will you be sharing your recipe?
I have the recipes up here on the thing. I just would need to make some copies if you're interested.
Okay.
Anything else? Yes.
Did you put the recipes on the website, please?
Yes, we can.
Satish.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. They're from Cooking Light, so a couple of them, and the one actually is from an individual. Did you have a question here? Yeah, I do have the recipes up here, so I can make some copies on the thing if there wasn't that many people that needed them. All right, anything else?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
At what age can you back off?
If you want the honest answer, I think, honestly, until you are in the casket, I don't think there should ever be a reason not to try to strive to be healthy. Because I think that's our response to God, you've given me this body, I'm going to make the best of it until you call me to be home with you. Anybody else? we're good.
So one more time, thank you very much.